You can see immediately that the mids in this are lifted and washed. There's not as much depth in the image. The highlights are what I like to call a little bit thin. It just is feeling thin. You can't feel the saturation. There's not enough like body to the image. Usually that means your mids are up too high, so let's go ahead and start to bring that down. You can see the contrast immediately bringing some of that saturation in. Feeling a bit heavy, so let's bring some of those highlights back. So here I am just doing lift, gamma, and gain. I'm not touching saturation right now. I'm not playing with my curve. My curve should be pretty constant. I picked that curve really quickly. Sometimes it might take you a minute to find a curve that's comfortable for you. You know, I've been doing this for a while now, and I kind of have an idea of how to build my curve. It's like routine, right? You just kind of get into a habit and you become familiar with something. Okay, this one might need a little push of saturation. So I'm bringing those mids down, bringing those highlights back up. But one of the things that's going to start to happen is it's going to get a little bit sharper than the other image. If our highlights are too high compared to the other one, it's going to just feel a little bit too sharp. So I'm going to go ahead and add some saturation here in my base layer. And our blacks seem to be pulled down a little bit further than they need to be. That's stretching this whole part of the image out and giving us a real thin kind of mid to low end image. Probably a bit better. Next shot is going to be our friend sitting in the overexposed window. This shot is going to be a little bit easier, I think, to tackle than this one, which starts with this overexposed window and comes into counter. This is going to feel a little bit less exposed than just this guy. We got a lot of bounce coming off that counter. So let's go ahead and do this dude and let him kind of inform how we're going to approach these windows. It's very important to know that this is like trial and error every single job. You might start working on a balance and realize that my approach for this shot is going to have to change based on what was actually shot here. You might have one shot that sits completely apart from the rest. And fortunately, if you are following some sort of structure, you can catch that before it's too late. If it's too late, it's okay. You know, you're just going to have to blow up a grade and start over on one shot. And it might be a little bit more difficult to make that feel a part of everything else. It's also important to notice because the exposure is so different, we might have to leave some room to do some shadow work and some highlight work to kind of separate these. We are going to find just a rough balance right now. We're not doing any crazy look building. So they need to feel like they're in the same place, in the same world, shot at the same time, believably, and that is the most important thing. Don't worry about trying to get the shadows perfect or the highlights perfect. His skin tone needs to be the same as everybody else's. His exposure on the shadow side needs to be the same as everybody else's. That's starting to feel better. Let's take a look at this shot. You can go ahead and try to apply that grade from over there. It doesn't necessarily translate. Sometimes you get lucky. Other times you just gotta kind of blow it up and start again. That's what the balance is all about. Again, because the higher dynamic range of this shot, we're gonna have to pull those shadows up and bring those highlights down. What we're doing is compressing the range or compressing the contrast, and so we're gonna have to add some saturation to this. We're not gonna be able to build it in with the contrast. So that starts to feel much better. That might seem a bit bright. So let's go ahead and bring this exposure down a little bit. Well, let's check. Yeah, again, another indication is you can see the shadow side here. This here is quite a bit exposed compared to that. Now, some people might fix that in the secondary. There's an argument to be made for that you can do that. Is exposure here better than the exposure here I don't know. That's a stylistic choice that you and your clients would have to make. I kind of like the exposure here. It's a little bit denser. Here it feels a bit blown out. So I think we will go that way. That's starting to feel better. And now that's probably something we can very easily match up in a secondary. Just a little bit more depth to the image, a little bit more black. I think that feels a bit better. There's two shots that I deliberately left out. That was the dog and the overhead shot. We can go ahead and do the overhead shot right now. We do have some information on which to base that. The dog kind of lives by itself, so we'll kind of deal with that as a one-off. Yeah, the overhead counter is significantly lacking some highlights. Remember that sun is just beaming down behind them. We got to have some higher exposure for that. I was just checking to see what's actually in there. Sometimes when you know that you're going to end up stretching something out, you want to check at the raw, see what the dynamic range of the original clip is, see what the original exposure was like, to see how far you can push something or how you can push something, whether you're going to push it in highlights or the mids or a combination of the two. If you have to pin your blacks way back down, it might not be a good idea to do it all in the midtones. You know, if you got to bring your highlights way down, it might not be a good idea to bring your midtones so far up. There's a bunch of different decisions to be made at that point based on what you're trying to match. Are you trying to get brighter or are you trying to get darker? Some mustard bottles right here you might want to check. What's our yellow doing? You know, what's our red doing? That guy here, is that guy here? Feels pretty good, skin-wise. This shot seems to be the brightest one out of the bunch, so let's bring that down a little bit. Balancing is very much a back and forth. It's called balancing for a reason. You're kind of hitting your highlights, hitting your mids, hitting your shadows, all kind of in tandem. If you're making too strong of adjustment on one side and not on the next, then you're likely going to run into a problem. All right, I think that's good enough of a balance to get going. Again, I think I might address this shot individually again and this one as well. That feels pretty good.